The kind of afternoon when the sun didn't just shine, it bore down, heavy and merciless, flattening the land under sheets of heat that shimmered like rising ghosts. Winds swept across the open desert, lifting red dust into slow, swirling spirals that drifted lazily before collapsing back to earth. There were days out here when even the sky felt silent, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. Coulter Vane had grown used to that silence. It had become the closest thing he had to company. He rode along the northern fence line, reins loose in one hand, hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the blinding glare. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his horse, a gray gelding with more age than strength left in him, plodded ahead as if it too was tired of the loneliness of this land. Coulter had been different once. Before the world took Sarah from him, before the stillness became suffocating instead of peaceful, before the house behind him turned into a monument to everything he'd lost. When he finished repairing the last section of wire, he paused, wiping the dirt from his palms onto his jeans. His gaze drifted back toward his ranch, small, isolated, and quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat echo at night. He told himself he preferred it that way. A man could convince himself of many things when there was no one left to argue. The house looked gray in the distance, even though it was made of whitewashed wood. Maybe it was just the way the sun hit it. Or maybe, deep down, the place really had lost its color the day Sarah died. Inside, it smelled of dry wood and cold ashes. The kitchen stove hadn't been warm for months except for when he forced himself to cook something simple. Dust coated the shelves like a fine film of time. The floors creaked not because someone walked on them, but because the heat twisted the boards each afternoon. There were no voices left, only the breath of the wind slipping through the cracks, making the windows tremble as if the house still shivered from grief. At night, the wooden beams clicked and popped, expanding and shrinking as the temperatures rose and fell. Those sounds used to make Sarah laugh. She'd say the house was clearing its throat. Now the same noises jolted Coulter awake every few hours, reminding him of how empty the place had become. Sleep came in fragments, never more than an hour or two before a memory clawed its way up from the darkness. He would see her face, hear her soft humming while she braided her hair, watch her walk across the room carrying that warmth that followed her everywhere. And then, as always, she vanished, leaving him alone again in a bed that had grown far too big. Most afternoons were the same. Work, silence, heat. The routine didn't comfort him anymore. It simply filled the hours so they wouldn't swallow him whole. That day, however, something cut through the monotony. Coulter had just secured a loose post when his gelding's ears pricked forward. At first, he didn't think much of it. In a place like this, the wind could trick a man. But then came the sound, low at first, then grinding, dragging, like a wooden wheel catching on ruts in the dry earth. A wagon, but not just any wagon. He could tell from the uneven rhythm that it was old, overburdened, or both. No one wandered out this far unless they were running from something, or desperate. Coulter stiffened, scanning the horizon. The noise grew louder, creaking wheels, hooves stumbling over rock. Something clattering loosely in the back. A trail of dust rose behind it, blown sideways by the wind. His pulse kicked, not with fear, but with something he hadn't felt for a long time. Awareness, a spark, the sense that the world he knew, his world of silence and ghosts, was about to shift. The wagon emerged over a rise, swaying like it might topple at any moment. It was hitched to a tired-looking horse and driven by someone he couldn't clearly see yet. Whoever it was, they were heading straight toward his land. Coulter narrowed his eyes, one hand dropping instinctively toward the worn leather of his holster. Not to draw, but to remind himself he wasn't as defenseless as the empty house made him feel. The wagon rolled closer, closer still. The desert heat blurred the figure on the seat until the world snapped into focus again. And just like that, without warning, without invitation, the long, suffocating silence of Coulter Vane's life cracked open. A stranger had arrived. The wagon lurched to a stop a few yards from the porch, its wheels sinking slightly into the loose red soil. The dust cloud it dragged behind finally settled, revealing a silhouette on the driver's bench. Small, straight-backed, unmoving despite the heat beating down. Then she stepped off. A woman, slender yet held together with the kind of strength that didn't come from muscle, but from a lifetime of refusing to bend. Her posture was as sharp and upright as a spear planted in the earth. Long dark hair, braided with strips of worn leather, fell over her shoulder. Her skirt, faded from sun and time, brushed her boots with every measured step. Atsa Willow, an Apache widow, though Coulter didn't know her name yet. Behind her, 3 children climbed down, quiet, sunburned and thin from too many miles and too few meals. The oldest girl, Tala, kept a protective arm around the younger boy, Koda. The smallest, Nalin, clung to the tailgate of the wagon, his eyes darting between Coulter and the open doorway of the house, as if either one might swallow him whole. Coulter took them in without speaking, his hand resting on the porch post. The wind carried a faint mix of scents to him: smoke, dry sage, and old wool, the kind woven into Navajo blankets. The wagon was covered in 2 such blankets, patched and repatched, edges frayed like they had been used as both shelter and shield. The woman faced him squarely, no fear in her posture, though her exhaustion was written plainly in the set of her shoulders. Her eyes, dark, steady, clouded by something more than road weariness, met his without flinching. She didn't waste time on courtesy. "I'm looking for work," she said, her voice low, roughened either by the road or by the weight of the months behind her. "I cook. I clean. I'll earn our keep. My children won't trouble you." Coulter blinked, caught off guard not only by the bluntness, but by the calm certainty she held on to, even though she clearly had nothing left. The desert wind tumbled across the porch, lifting a strand of her hair. She didn't brush it away. She stood as if her whole life depended on this moment, yet she refused to let desperation show. Tala kept her chin lifted the way a young doe does when she's ready to bolt, but refuses to step back first. Koda stared at Coulter like he was weighing him against dangers he'd seen before. And Nalan, the boy barely breathed, his small hands trembling against the side of the wagon. They were a picture of travelers who had run out of road. Coulter felt something twist inside him, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 3 long, empty years. Not pity, not sympathy. Something quieter than that. Something closer to recognition. The woman, Atsa, didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shift her weight. She simply waited. Coulter cleared his throat, trying to push away the tightness forming there. "You from around these part?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. No one with that kind of stance, that kind of gaze, came from the towns. "No," she said simply, and that was all she gave him. He looked at the children again. Their ribs showed through their shirts. Their cheeks were hollowed by hunger and travel. Their eyes were too old for their ages. He wondered how long they had been on the move, and what they were running from. He wanted to ask, but he didn't. Something about the way she held herself told him that answers, if they ever came, wouldn't come today. Instead, he shifted his weight, suddenly restless. "I don't hire often," he said, "and I don't keep folks long if they don't fit." Atsa didn't even blink. "We will work. We only need a chance." Her voice did something to him, broke through whatever thick layer of dust had settled over his chest since Sarah died. She sounded like a woman who had swallowed every ounce of pride she had left to get her children to one more safe place. He exhaled slowly, turning the decision over in his mind. He had told himself for years that he preferred silence, but looking at the 3 small figures behind her, the silence suddenly felt colder than it ever had before. "Fine," Coulter finally said. "1 week. We'll see how it goes." Atsa nodded once. No relief, no emotion, just acknowledgement, like a warrior accepting terms. But her children's shoulders loosened, and Tala's hands slipped into her little brother's. As Coulter stepped aside to let them through the doorway, the strangest feeling pricked at him. That in opening his home to them for a week, he had opened something in himself he didn't mean to. A week's trial had begun, and with it, the first stirrings of life returning to a man who thought he had forgotten how to feel anything at all. The sun dropped behind the distant mesas, leaving the land washed in a copper glow as evening settled over Vainside Ranch. Coulter had expected the woman and her children to rest after so many miles of travel, but rest was the last thing on Atsa Willow's mind. The moment she stepped inside his house, she moved with purpose. Just steady, like someone who'd spent her entire life surviving by never letting herself slow down. She set down her bundle and went straight to the hearth, kneeling to coax the cold ashes back to life. Dry twigs, a few shavings of kindling, a practiced flick of flint. Within moments, flames licked their way upward, casting warm light across the room. For the first time in 3 years, the old stove glowed. Coulter stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with a mix of confusion and something else he couldn't quite name. Atsa didn't ask permission before she pulled the heavy pan forward or before she reached up to open the dark wooden cabinets. She moved like a woman stepping into a world she already understood. She tugged the curtains wide, dust puffing out of the folds, and then tied them back with strips of leather. She wiped the long-abandoned table with a damp cloth. She swept the floor with a broom whose bristles had gone stiff from disuse. Every motion was clean, efficient, quiet, as if silence itself were something she had learned to work beside. Tala and Koda helped without a single word exchange. The girl moved like a whisper, gliding from cabinet to shelf. The boy lifted stools, shook out rugs, and checked the doorframe, as though making sure the house posed no hidden threat. They were the children of the wild, light-footed, observant, and precise, shaped by a life where mistakes cost dearly. Coulter's house didn't quite know what to do with them. It had been still for so long that each new sound, cloth sliding over wood, footsteps, a broom tapping the floor, felt like the building itself was waking from a long sleep. When the stew began to simmer, the scent drifted through the room. Wild sage, desert onion, and something earthy and warm that he couldn't place. Atsa ladled the stew into bowls and set them on the table without ceremony. Coulter hesitated, feeling strangely like a guest in his own home. He sat, lifted a spoonful to his mouth, and froze. It tasted like life in the open desert, clean, rough, honest. "Good," he muttered, almost surprised. Atsa gave the smallest nod, neither proud nor shy. Her children ate quietly but quickly, glancing now and then toward Coulter, as if still unsure whether they were truly allowed to be here. After dinner, Coulter expected them to find a corner to curl up in, but the woman kept going, rinsing bowls, scrubbing the cooktop, shaking out blankets, smoothing the linens on the small cot he had pulled from storage. She seemed determined to put everything in place before she let her body rest. Tala folded the quilts. Koda brought in fresh water. Nalan, still skittish, simply followed his mother, clutching a scrap of woven cloth. Coulter leaned on the porch post, listening to the sounds drifting from inside. Soft footsteps, murmured words, the quiet clatter of dishes being stacked neatly where they belonged. Sounds he hadn't heard in years. Sounds he didn't realize he'd missed. By the time the sky deepened into a velvet blue, shadows stretching long across the yard, the house no longer felt like the cave of silence it had become. It felt warmer, occupied, alive. When the night finally settled in, Atsa lit a single oil lamp. Its golden glow cast her face in soft curves instead of the sharp angles the sun had carved into it earlier. She guided her children to their cot, smoothing their hair with a tenderness that didn't need words. Then she turned the lamp down and blew it out in one gentle breath. Moments later, a sound drifted through the dark, a quiet, lilting melody. An Apache lullaby sung low and steady, mournful but soft, lonely but comforting. It slid beneath the doors, seeped into the wooden beams, and wrapped itself around Coulter's heart with a grip he wasn't prepared for. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the echo of that alien, beautiful tune. Something inside him, something dead and buried for years, shifted. He realized then that what he'd lost wasn't just a wife or a life he once knew. He had lost the sound of living things. Laughter, voices, the warmth of bodies moving through a home. And in one evening, a stranger had brought all of it back. Not in full, not completely, but enough to make the emptiness inside him crack open. Sleep didn't come easily, but for the first time in years, he didn't mind staying awake. Morning light slid across the wooden floorboards like a thin sheet of gold, touching corners of the house that hadn't seen warmth in years. Coulter stepped into the kitchen expecting the usual cold stillness, only to find something entirely different. The stove was warm, the table was wiped clean, a pot simmered softly, filling the air with the savory scent of beans and herbs. It wasn't magic, but it felt like it. The little changes crept up on him in a way he hadn't anticipated. A swept floor, a washed cup, a coat hung neatly instead of tossed over a chair. The kind of details Sarah used to fuss over, details he had let die the day she did. Now they returned, not with fanfare, but with quiet, steady persistence, carried by the hands of a woman who barely spoke to him. Atsa Willow was a storm that moved silently. She worked in rhythms he didn't yet understand, unhurried, unbothered, but always moving, always doing, and her children mirrored her. Tala glided around the house with the grace of someone who had learned early how to make herself small. Coda moved with the alertness of a boy who knew danger came without warning. Even Nalin padded across the floor so softly it was as if his feet didn't dare disturb the air. By midday, Coulter had grown used to the faint rustle of activity behind him. It was strange, comforting, but strange, like living with ghosts who had learned to breathe again. The first time he saw Atsa smile, it hit him harder than he expected. It happened in the yard while Coda was trying to show Tala how to toss a dried seed pod like a skipping stone. The boy flung it with too much force, and it bounced off the porch post, ricocheting straight into his own forehead. Tala burst into soft laughter. Coda rubbed his head, scowling, and Atsa, quiet, disciplined Atsa, let out a tiny breath of a laugh. Not loud, not obvious, but enough to lift the corner of her mouth. Coulter stood still, hammer in hand, feeling as if someone had knocked the wind out of him. He hadn't seen a smile on a woman's face in his yard since Sarah, and for a fleeting second, he wondered if he even remembered how to react to it. Nalin noticed him watching. Instead of turning away like every other time, the boy paused. His wide, dark eyes studied Coulter. Not with fear this time, but with curiosity. Small, fragile curiosity. Coulter nodded gently, nothing more. Nalin didn't hide. A tiny victory, but a victory nonetheless. At dinner, Atsa set his plate down, but stepped back before he could invite her to sit. She always did. She served her children, made sure they ate, then took her own plate to the corner of the room or the porch, keeping a polite distance between them. Not avoidance, distance. There was a difference. He respected it, though he didn't fully understand it. Night settled over the ranch with a soft hum. Coyotes called somewhere far off, and the breeze carried the smell of dust and juniper. Coulter stepped into the main room to check the windows when he saw her. Atsa sat near the oil lamp, the flame painting her face in warm amber. Her fingers moved with practiced skill as she pulled thread through a torn blanket, patching it with a piece cut from the hem of her own shawl. Every movement was careful, deliberate, the kind of focus a person used when they didn't want their mind to wander back into memories. He hesitated before speaking. "Don't have to stay up doing that. Could have been mended tomorrow." She didn't look up. "We sleep warmer tonight." A simple answer, said without edge or apology. He stepped closer, leaning a shoulder against the doorframe. The room felt smaller with her in it, yet not in a bad way. More like the walls finally had someone to hold their warmth. After a moment, she set down the blanket and met his gaze. "People think suffering breaks us," she said quietly. "It can, but not for my people. For the Apache, pride is the last thing we let go. It is the peace we keep, even when the world takes everything else." Her voice held no bitterness, only truth. Coulter felt the weight of those words settle deep in him. He saw then, more clearly than before, that she wasn't just a woman trying to survive. She was a woman who had been pushed, cornered, hurt, yet still chose to stand like a pine rooted into a cliffside, battered by storms but never falling. He respected her in a way he hadn't respected anyone outside of Sarah. And later, when he lay in bed listening to the faint sounds of her children breathing, he realized something unsettling. His heart had begun to stir over the smallest things. A smile, a nod, a voice quietly repairing the cracks in his home. And the strangest part? He didn't want it to stop. The heat of the day lingered long after sunset, clinging to the air in a way that made the ground feel restless beneath one's boots. Coulter was repairing the latch on the barn door when he heard a sound. Soft, thin, wrong. A thud, a hiss of breath, then silence. He dropped the hammer and sprinted toward the well, his boots pounding against the dry earth. And there, in the dim spill of moonlight, he found her. Atsa Willow lay crumpled beside the wooden bucket, her hands still wet from washing clothes that hung limp over the rim. Her braid had come loose, strands sticking to her cheek. Sweat glistened along her temples, and her breathing rattled like wind pressed through a narrow canyon. "Atsa!" His voice cracked as he knelt beside her. She didn't answer. Her skin burned under his palm, hot enough to make him jerk back in shock. Fever. A bad one. Without hesitating, he slipped an arm under her shoulders and lifted her. She weighed far less than he'd imagined. Not fragile, but light. Too light. as if the strength she carried was borrowed from grit rather than flesh. For the first time since she arrived, he felt the truth of her body. Thin, worn, held together by sheer will. Tala and Koda came running at the sound of his shout, fear etched across their faces. "What happened?" Tala whispered, voice trembling. "She collapsed," Coulter said, adjusting his hold as he carried Atsa toward the house. "She's burning up." Inside, he laid her gently on the cot. Her head lolled, her eyes fluttered but didn't open. The children hovered beside him like frightened shadows. Tala's voice cracked. She hasn't eaten enough. She gave us her share. For weeks." The words hit him like a spurred kick to the ribs. He felt anger rise, not at her, not truly, but at the cruel, blinding logic of a mother who would starve herself so her children might survive just a little longer. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice harsh with worry. Tala lowered her gaze. "She told us not to. She said, if you knew, you might send us away." Coulter closed his eyes briefly, fighting the urge to curse the world that had taught these children such fear. "I wouldn't have done that," he said, softer now but edged with pain. "Not ever." Koda swallowed hard, looking at his mother as though she might disappear if he blinked. Atsa stirred barely. "No!" Her voice was thin, raw. "No trouble. I cause enough trouble." Coulter leaned forward. "You're not trouble." Her lips trembled. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye, silent, uninvited, but real. "I was afraid," she whispered. "People like me, women like me, were turned away before we can even ask. I thought if I worked hard enough, you'd let the children stay. Even if I couldn't." The confession tore at something inside him. She wasn't a woman accustomed to falling, and yet here she was, broken open by fever and fear. He steadied his voice. "You're not going anywhere, none of you." Atsa tried to turn her face away, but she was too weak. He soaked a cloth in cool water and pressed it gently to her forehead. She flinched at first, Apache pride resisting help, then relaxed, her eyelids dragging shut. He brewed a mix of willow bark and desert mint, the way his mother had taught him when he was young. The steam curled upward as he held the cup to Atsa's lips. "Drink," he murmured. She obeyed barely. Hour after hour, he sat beside her, changing the cloth as it warmed, wiping sweat from her brow, keeping her children close with a steady presence they did not question. The fire crackled softly, and outside, the desert wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage across the yard. Her fever broke just before dawn. Her breathing eased. Her hands, once trembling, grew still. And in the quiet that followed, Coulter felt the ground shift beneath him, not with fear or responsibility, but with something deeper. Trust, fragile and new, had taken root between them. When Tala finally fell asleep against his arm and Koda curled against his leg like a wary pup, Coulter looked at Atsa and knew this night had changed everything. She wasn't just a woman working for a roof. She wasn't just a stranger passing through. She was someone whose strength had cost her more than most men could bear. Someone who fought alone until her body broke. Someone who, for the first time, had let him see her fall. And he found himself needing, to help her rise again. Night fell heavy over Vainside Ranch, thick as a wool blanket. The fever had loosened its grip on Atsa, but her strength had not returned. She sat propped against a pillow. Coulter had folded twice over to keep her upright, her face still pale beneath her copper-toned skin. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Orange sparks drifted upward, casting shadows that swayed across the walls like ghosts of memories she had tried to bury. Coulter sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, the chair creaking quietly beneath his weight. He didn't speak. He didn't push. He simply waited, something no one else in her life had ever done for her. Atsa's gaze lowered to the flames. Her breath trembled once, barely noticeable. Then she began. "My husband," she whispered, voice small in a way he hadn't heard before, "was killed before the sun came up, shot from behind. They said he was stealing cattle. He wasn't. But..." Her fingers twisted into the blanket, knuckles whitening. No one cared to listen. Coulter's jaw tightened, not from judgment, but from the quiet fury of a man who knew injustice when he heard it. She continued, the words scraping their way out like stones dragged across dry earth. "They came after our people next. Soldiers, ranchers, anyone who wanted land or revenge. They burned our camp, shot at anyone who ran. My brother died trying to pull a child from one of the tents." Her voice cracked. "They called it pacifying. They called us the threat. Her eyes, those dark gray eyes that always seemed carved from stone, flickered with heat, pain, rage long contained. I took my children and left. I walked for days. Every time I tried to find work, they spat at me. Some threw rocks. One man grabbed me by the hair and dragged me from his store. Said he wouldn't have an Apache woman dirtying his threshold. Coulter swallowed hard. She lifted her chin, her voice steadier now, fueled by the memories she could not forget. Another man offered work, but when I came back at sundown, he told me to earn lodging in his own way. Her lip trembled, then stiffened. I fought him, scratched him, ran with the children until my feet bled. The fire popped loudly, startling Nalan in his sleep. Atsa's voice softened. We kept running. Every town, every ranch, they shut their doors. Some cursed us. Some laughed. Some hurt me. She drew in a shuddering breath. The world made us criminals without a crime. She blinked hard, and for the first time, a tear escaped, tracking down her cheek in a slow silver line. I kept moving so no one could take my children. I worked until my hands tore. I gave them my food until... She hesitated, swallowing the shame. Until my body failed. The fire reflected in her eyes, turning them into molten gray, raw and bright, like metal heated in a forge. Coulter didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't pry. His silence wasn't cold, it was steady. The kind of silence that didn't demand more than she could give. The kind of silence that told her she was finally being heard. No one had ever listened to her like that. She looked at him as though expecting to see doubt or pity or judgment. But all she saw was a quiet steadiness. A man rooted deep as a cottonwood tree, refusing to look away from her wounds. After a long moment, Coulter leaned forward, his voice low, firm, carrying the weight of a promise he didn't yet know he was making. You don't have to run here, he said. Not from me. Not from anyone. The words settled over her like a warm blanket. Her shoulders collapsed a fraction. Her breath left her in a shaky exhale, almost a sob, almost relief. She had heard 1,000 lies from 1,000 mouths, but something in Coulter's tone, in the way he looked at her, made her believe this one truth. In that quiet place, lit only by firelight and the slow breaths of her sleeping children, neither of them realized the moment had shifted the world beneath their feet. The days that followed settled over Vainside Ranch like a soft quilt, thin, fragile, but warm enough to make everyone forget, for a moment, the harshness of the world beyond its fences. Atsa's fever eased, and though she still moved slower than before, a quiet steadiness returned to her step. Coulter watched her regain color one breath at a time, feeling something inside him loosen, something he hadn't even realized had been bound tight for years. Bit by bit, the ranch began to transform. Nalan, once a shadow lurking behind his mother's skirt, started venturing farther from her side. At first, he only watched from the porch while Coulter sawed a plank or fixed a hinge. But eventually, curiosity won. One morning, Coulter felt a small tug at his sleeve. Nalan pointed to the hammer, then to himself. Coulter handed it to him without a word. The boy didn't swing it, just held it carefully, reverently, like a sacred object. A moment later, he smiled. A real smile. Bright and sudden enough to stun anyone who saw it. And from that day on, his laughter, light, breathy, unsure, echoed across the yard more often. Coda took to the horses next. The boy circled the corral all morning, studying the animals with the quiet intensity of someone who'd learned survival by observing every detail. At lunchtime, he finally approached Coulter. "Show me," was all he said. So Coulter showed him. Foot placement, reins, posture, breathing. Coda listened with fierce concentration, and by the week's end, he could guide the old bay mare in a slow, careful circle. Atsa stood by the fence watching, one hand pressed to her heart, pride softening her entire face. Tala found her place in the kitchen, moving in perfect rhythm beside her mother. The girl chopped vegetables with surprising skill, stirred pots without letting them burn, and handled the fire like someone twice her age. The aroma of their cooking, spices, herbs, a touch of smoke, began to drift through the house daily, sweeping out the years of dust and sorrow. Coulter often stood in the doorway just to watch them. Atsa, Tala, and Coda preparing a meal. Nalin humming to himself as he arranged kindling. The warmth of voices mixing in the air. It looked, felt like a family. The illusion strengthened when Coulter started helping the children rebuild the old chicken coop. The structure had been leaning for years, threatening to collapse with the slightest wind. Together, they dug in new posts, hammered boards straight, tightened the wire fencing. Tala held the nails. Koda worked the saw. Nalan passed tools with growing confidence. And Atsa watched from the steps, a rare softness in her gaze. That evening, something changed. For the first time, Atsa didn't take her plate to the porch. She hesitated, hovering near the table while the children settled in. Coulter didn't say a word, just pulled out the chair across from him. She lowered her eyes, then sat. Her movements were shy, almost timid, completely different from the fierce resolve she carried everywhere else. She ate quietly, but each bite looked like a small act of bravery. Halfway through the meal, Tala teased Koda about the way he had nearly fallen off the horse that morning. Koda, embarrassed, tried to deny it, but Atsa laughed. Not a small chuckle, not the faint smile Coulter had seen once before. A real laugh, warm, musical, unguarded. And that laugh did something to him. It dug itself deep under his ribs and settled there, bright and alive, like a forgotten ember rekindling after a long winter. It made the room feel fuller, lighter, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Later, when the dishes were washed and the children were asleep, Coulter stood on the porch staring out at the horizon. The sky was streaked in purples and fading golds, the land stretching endlessly into the quiet dark. He thought about the past weeks, the noise, the warmth, the faces that filled his home with life he thought he'd lost forever. He thought about Atsa's laugh, how it had reached him in places he believed were beyond saving. For the first time in years, his life felt like it had meaning again. Not just survival, not just habit, meaning. But as the wind shifted, carrying a chill off the distant hills, a familiar unease whispered through the air. In the west, peace was a fragile gift. It came softly but never stayed long. And though Coulter didn't know it yet, the storm that had been chasing Atsa across half the territory was finally catching up to her. The calm that had wrapped Vainside Ranch began to thin, like the last warmth slipping from a dying fire. The change came quietly, first as a whisper on the wind, then as a rumor in town carried by men who drank too much and talked too loose. A gang had been seen near the canyon ridge. 5 men rough as sandpaper and twice as mean. The kind who rode hard, stole harder, and left trouble in their wake. But what made Coulter's blood run cold was the name one of them let slip at the saloon. Looking for some Apache woman. Says she stole something from him. Coulter didn't need to hear more. He knew exactly who they meant. Atsa Willow. She had told him enough about her past for him to guess the rest. Whoever had burned her camp, whoever had hunted her across miles of sand and hunger, wasn't done with her yet. Trouble never let go of people like her. It followed them like a curse. 2 days later, the trouble showed its teeth. Miguel, the ranch hand who helped drive cattle on the far side of Vainside, had taken the herd out near the south pasture at daybreak. By noon, he still hadn't returned. Coulter saddled his horse, anxiety clawing at his stomach as he rode across the open land. He found Miguel near the edge of a dry arroyo, sprawled on the ground, dust covering his shirt, blood darkening the collar where he'd been pistol whipped. "Miguel," Coulter dropped beside him. Miguel groaned, opening one swollen eye. "Senor, they jumped me. 3 men, maybe 4. Coulter's jaw tightened. "What did they say?" Miguel winced as he tried to sit. "They asked if you had an Indian woman living on your land. Said they'd heard she's hiding here. I told them I didn't know nothing." Coulter felt heat rise in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper, protective, primitive. "Tracks?" he asked. Miguel nodded weakly toward a cluster of mesquite bushes. Coulter stood, scanning the ground. It didn't take long to find them. Hoof prints that didn't belong to any horse on the ranch. Deep impressions. Fresh. They had been close. Too close. He helped Miguel onto his horse and walked him back toward the ranch, checking the horizon every few minutes. The afternoon sun pressed hard against the land, but Coulter felt a colder weight settle across his shoulders. Danger was already here, stalking the edges of his world. When they reached home, Coulter told Atsa and the children only what they needed to know. That some strangers had been seen nearby, and everyone should stay close. Atsa's face tightened, but she said nothing. He saw fear flicker through her gaze, quick and sharp, like an animal who had learned to expect the worst. He didn't tell her the rest. She had enough ghosts chasing her. That night, with the sky turning indigo and the cicadas humming like an omen, Coulter prepared the house. He checked the rifle, then the shotgun, secured the shutters, bolted the doors. He lit only one lamp, keeping the others dark so the ranch looked quiet, abandoned, not worth the trouble. Miguel rested in the storage room, wrapped in blankets. The children slept close to their mother. Atsa sat with her back against the wall, eyes wide even in the dim light. Coulter walked the porch with a rifle slung over his shoulder, listening to the night. Every sound felt wrong. Every shift in the grass made his hand tighten on the barrel. He wasn't a man prone to nerves, but he knew the type of gang that hunted a woman like Atsa. They weren't men who wanted money. They wanted ownership, power, revenge. The kind of violence that left scars on the soul. Coulter paced the length of the porch again, boots creaking softly on old boards. The sky above was clear, stars sharp as needles, but the land around him felt different, tense, watching. A coyote howled somewhere near the ridge, then silence. Coulter raised his rifle and looked toward the dark line of hills. He didn't sleep that night, didn't blink for long stretches. He stood guard like a soldier on a battlefield, every nerve alive, every instinct awake. The sun was high and merciless, beating down on the plains until the earth shimmered like hammered copper. Coulter had taken the south ridge at noon, circling the cattle line to check for more signs of the intruders. He was halfway across the flats when a sound cracked through the stillness. Sharp, violent, unmistakable. A gunshot, then another. He froze. The echo rolled across the land like thunder over stone. His heart lurched into his throat. The ranch. He pulled the reins hard and kicked his horse into a full run. Dirt exploded beneath the hooves, rising behind him in a long tail of red dust. Wind tore at his coat as he leaned low, urging the horse faster, faster, every instinct screaming that he was already too late. By the time the ranch came into view, his blood ran cold. 3 riders had dismounted in the front yard, rifles drawn, their shadows long and jagged against the dirt. The house door hung open, the porch steps splintered from a boot kick. And standing between those men and her children was Atsa Willow. She stood with her feet planted firmly in the red dust, shoulders squared, braid whipping in the dry wind. Her Winchester was leveled, steady as a steel bar, its barrel pointed straight at the chest of the man closest to her. Tala, Koda, and Nalan crouched behind a water trough, their faces white with fear. But Atsa, she looked like a stone carving brought to life, unshakable, silent, ancient. Coulter's breath stuttered. He had seen her strong. He had seen her determined. But he had never seen her like this. A warrior. And God help him. The sight terrified him more than the armed men facing her. "Atsa!" he shouted, but the wind stole his voice. The outlaws didn't notice him yet. Their attention was fixed on the Apache woman who had defied them. One of them spat tobacco into the dirt. "Drop the rifle, squaw. Ain't no use fighting. We only need you alive long enough to make you pay what you owe." Atsa didn't flinch. Her voice cut clean through the hot air. "My people owe you nothing." The man laughed bitterly. "Then I guess we'll take it in blood." The second outlaw, a wiry man with sunburnt skin, cocked his revolver. "Boys, she's got fight. Let's end this." Coulter was close now, riding down the last stretch at a dead sprint. He could feel the panic clawing up his spine. He reached for the rifle strapped to his saddle. But the first shot didn't come from him. It came from Atsa. Her Winchester roared like thunder. The nearest outlaw stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, screaming as he dropped to the dirt. Chaos erupted. The remaining 2 fired back. Bullets tore splinters from the porch rail, shattered a window, punched holes into the chicken coop. A cloud of dust and gun smoke billowed around them. "Atsa, get down!" Coulter bellowed. But she didn't. She fired again, teeth clenched, eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and fury. Her children huddled behind her, trusting her with their lives. Every instinct she had, every scar, every memory of running, boiled into raw defiance. Coulter jumped from his horse before it fully stopped, rolled behind the water barrel, and fired a clean shot that slammed into the leg of another outlaw. The man screamed and crashed into the dirt, his revolver flying from his hand. The third outlaw, broad-shouldered, mean-eyed, spun toward Coulter, raising his rifle. Coulter fired again, but the man dove behind the wagon, bullets slicing the air between them. Dust swirled, gun smoke stung the throat. Horses shrieked in panic. Coulter heard Atsa cry out, not in pain, but in sheer effort. as she fired another round. Her arms shook. The recoil nearly knocked her off balance. He felt something inside him snap. Fear, protectiveness, something deeper. He had lost Sarah. He would not lose this woman, not her. The outlaw charged out from behind the wagon, gun raised to shoot Atsa point blank. Coulter didn't think. He tackled the man full force, slamming him into the dust. The rifle went off, the bullet whistling into the porch beam inches from Atsa's head. They wrestled brutally, fists in boots and dirt flying. Coulter grabbed the outlaw's wrist, twisted, heard a crack, and ripped the gun free. One pull of the trigger, a final scream, then silence. The dust slowly settled, painting everything in a red haze. Atsa lowered her rifle. Her chest rose and fell in sharp breaths. Tears clung to her lashes, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of surviving one more time. Coulter staggered toward her, blood on his knuckles, heart pounding. When their eyes met, something wordless passed between them. Something earned in fire and danger and instinct. Something that felt like the beginning of a promise. But the moment didn't last. Because in the West, even after the gun smoke clears, danger rarely ends. The smoke cleared long after the gunfire stopped. What remained was silence, thick, heavy, and strangely sacred. The yard looked as though a windstorm had torn through it. Dust still floated in the air. Boards were splintered and spent shells glinted like cold coins in the dirt. But everyone was alive. Tala held Nalan close, whispering softly into his hair. Coda stood beside Coulter, helping him wrap cloth around his arm where a bullet had grazed him. The boy's hands shook at first, but he steadied them with a determination far older than his years. "You're doing good," Coulter murmured. Coda didn't answer, just tightened the knot and stepped back with a proud, shy nod. Atsa lingered near the porch, one hand braced against the rail, the other clutching her Winchester. Her braid was coming undone, her dress torn at the sleeve, and dust streaked across her cheek. She looked exhausted, but unbroken. Coulter walked toward her slowly, his steps uneven from the fight. When he reached her, he reached out, gently, cautiously, touching her forearm to check for wounds. Atsa flinched, breath hitching in her throat. Reflex, memory, pain carved into muscle. But this time she didn't pull away. Her eyes lifted to his, dark gray, storm-worn, but soft in the corners. Coulter felt something twist inside his chest, something deep, something he thought had died with Sarah. "You're hurt," he said quietly. "I've been hurt before," Atsa whispered. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from the shock of having someone care. He rested his hand over hers, warm and steady. "I'm glad you're still here." For a long moment, neither spoke. The ranch around them lay wrecked, scattered and bruised, but alive. The children, Atsa, him. Life clung stubbornly to this patch of land. Tala led her brothers inside, leaving the two adults alone in the fading afternoon light. Atsa's shoulders trembled. Her fingers tightened around the rifle until her knuckles whitened. She was a woman built from steel and scar tissue, a survivor of more than any soul should endure. When Coulter brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, her breath finally gave way, soft and broken, like the first crack in a frozen river. Then slowly she leaned forward, not collapsing, not seeking protection, but offering trust. Her forehead touched Coulter's shoulder. Her body melted against his, and his arms rose instinctively, cautiously, then securely around her. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a promise. It was something stronger. The moment two people, both shattered, both hardened, finally allowed themselves to rest against another heartbeat. Her whisper brushed his collarbone. I thought we would lose everything today." "We didn't," he murmured. "Not today, not you." She closed her eyes and breathed him in. The ranch dust, the gun smoke, the scent of cedar from his worn shirt, and Coulter held her as if anchoring her to the earth itself. When they finally stepped apart, something had changed. Not spoken, not defined, but real. Atsa tended to Nalan's scraped knee. Tala stirred beans over the stove. Coda washed the blood from the Winchester barrel with the solemnity of a young man who had seen too much too soon. For the first time, the house felt full in a way that had nothing to do with noise. It felt full because it had a heartbeat again. As twilight settled, Coulter stepped onto the porch. The sky was a long stretch of lavender, fading into night. He stood quietly watching through the window. Inside, Atsa laughed softly, just a faint sound, but enough to warm the room. The children gathered around her. A pot simmered on the stove. Light glowed behind their silhouettes. Home, not born in but found. Coulter exhaled, a slow breath he'd been holding for years. Family isn't what you're given, he said under his breath, watching them with something tender in his eyes. It's what you find when you stop running. And as the stars blinked awake above the desert, he wondered, in a land shaped by blood and dust, what would you fight for if you finally found something worth keeping?